Hey folks, I am just making a quick sort of impromptu video today. Going to be just kind of speaking off the cuff here, so bear with me. This will just be a Patreon exclusive video because I don't think a wider audience is really going to engage with this type of video. But maybe you will find it useful, at least in terms of clarifying my thoughts um, with respect to my latest analysis video. I've gotten a lot of comments. Um, you know, I I forgot that like when you reach a certain critical mass in terms of like I don't know, your video gets over 10,000 views. I don't exactly know what the number is, but there there is a point at which um, there's a point at which if you are really from from a uh, from a creator perspective, if you are open and transparent about what you think about certain things, um, you will be attacked for it. And of course, I anticipate that. Um, and I'm not complaining. Um, I think it is a structural feature of um, how creators have to sort of navigate platforms like YouTube, if that makes sense. Um, the issue to me is, you know, with such a lengthy video, this this latest one I did, the analysis of 3D Workers Island was about uh, almost 2.5 hours long. So I there is a degree to which such a long video essay is almost inherently inaccessible. And I suppose I could be accused of being kind of an obscurantist because I am talking about such a wide array of things and I'm getting into some specialized fields and I'm using specialized language to talk about those fields, or I'm trying to at least. I'm trying to maintain some level of fidelity with respect to the subject matter. So that's kind of that's kind of broad. Let me kind of give you an example. So I talk about death of the author um, in the meta commentary section. Obviously, this is sort of a high concept lit theory idea that I am, in some sense, trying to popularize because I think it would be clarifying to understand that a work of art is not some grand product of, you know, the intentions of an artist. Um, Rather, it is a network of signifiers, to put it simplistically. Um, this is not, people have trouble distinguishing normative claims from descriptive claims. So when I say that, I'm not saying that this should be the case. I'm saying that this is the case. So in other words, because of the way signifiers function, there's a certain level of ambiguity and openness to it. And in some sense, this is what makes art special, is that it's open to interpretation. I hope if you have been following me for long enough, you will see that I continually come back to this theme, that there's a level of ambiguity and openness to a work of art, and in some sense that's almost definitive of what art is and how it functions in a broader context. Um, and this is a double-edged sword if you're an artist. So I do not I sympathize with anybody who is in the position of making art, especially in this very hyper mediated, alienated, fraught internet culture. Um, Even to call it a culture is too reductive. It's a uh, an array of different cultures, right? And in some sense, having to navigate all of the different sensibilities of people is something that is very alienating for myself as someone who makes makes content online, and I can only imagine it's alienating for an artist trying to work in this space as well, you know, um, even more so because in some, you know, in some sense, like when I make a video, I'm just directly telling you, hey, here's what I think, you know, and I try to be as clear as possible. But when you're making a work of art, that's altogether a different process, and it's almost like, you know, um, creating something that is uh, perhaps perhaps attempting to convey something that ordinary language cannot. And I think that is a worthwhile endeavor, and that's why I try to support things, you know, works that I think are interesting and that works that I think do something interesting in terms of attempting to articulate something that is would be very, very difficult to explain in like an ordinary conversation. Um, and I think that just relating it to my own experiences when I put something out there into the world, um, going back to this idea of a double-edged sword, you know, it's a double-edged sword in the sense that, um, I mean, I don't know about you, but like to me, being misunderstood is really, really perturbing to me. Like when someone is not necessarily criticizing me, but in my mind, misunderstanding what I'm trying to say and attacking a position that I don't actually hold. Um, you know, so for example, like I have this whole section about AI and consciousness, right? And I think in hindsight, I could have done a better job of um, front loading that section with certain caveats and front loading it with uh, certain things I could say to head off misconceptions about my argument. But there's only so much of that you can do, honestly, um, without sort of devolving into like all, you know, in other words, if you if you entertain every possible bad faith interpretation of what you're saying, um, your like my video script would just turn into an endless series of caveats, and I don't think anybody really wants to hear that. You know what I mean? Um, but I do think I could have done a better job um, explaining explaining what I think up front. There's a reason I attack the hard problem of consciousness, um, and there's a reason I talk about LLMs in relation to the way consciousness is discussed in popular discourse. And it's not because I think LLMs are conscious, or it's not because I think that um, they, it's not because I think these systems merit moral consideration at the present moment. I think that would be a bit outlandish to say at this point. What I am attempting to try to articulate is the fact that there is such ambiguity and confusion about this notion of consciousness and the way it is discussed in contemporary discourse, that because of this ambiguity, we really need to start thinking about what what types of beings merit moral consideration and why. And the why of it is very important. Because if you start using fallacies and like specifically like special pleading to try to explain why humans are in some kind of category that's distinct from other beings or potential beings, then you are operating on the same logic that has been used time and time again throughout history to exclude certain people from moral consideration. So I hope people can understand what I'm saying here. It's not that I'm saying, like, I made a statement recently basically saying, like, look, LLMs might be a precursor to this thing we call consciousness in the same sense that, like, a primordial shrew is like a small mammal from the Jurassic era is a precursor to humans, right? So, like we evolved from these creatures. And that process took a lot of time, right? The realm of technology is different because things accelerate in a way that is uh, altogether different from biological processes like human evolution, right? But my point is that I personally think we are not at the point where, like, an LLM is a conscious being, and I would like to interrogate what people even really mean when they say conscious or sentient or all of these things, right? There are philosophers who attempt to place a certain flag on these terms and say, this is what this means. And yet, time and time again, despite their attempts to clarify, it is nonetheless the case that consciousness remains a cudgel in popular discourse to to distinguish humans um, and elevate humans in a sort of hierarchy um, where human thought is at the apex and these other things are beneath us. They're inferior. So I hope I've impressed upon you why this logic is problematic, right? Um, I'm not saying problematic in a social justice sense, although it does have that valiance to it. I'm saying it's logically problematic. It's special pleading. Um, so I suppose I'm just venting right now, and I hope you can understand that. Um, I hope you can understand that maybe like when I release a video into the public, uh, I am aware that there are there are going to be all sorts of interpretations of what I'm saying, and um, when you read the comments of my videos, you need to understand that just because somebody has like left an extremely long wall of text, that doesn't necessarily mean that their point is valid. So and that, by the way, that applies to me as well. Like when I make a really long video, that doesn't necessarily mean I'm making valid points just by virtue of the amount of time and attention I'm dedicating to it. You should evaluate what I'm saying on the basis of whether or not you think it's reasonable, you know? Um, so I know most people do that. I'm just trying to I'm trying to sort of carve out a path here where I can navigate the insanity of the internet in a way that's not going to drive me nuts. Um, because of course, like LLMs and AI and this whole realm of discourse is extremely fraught because it's become sort of a cultural flashpoint. Um, Artists perceive this technology as a threat to their livelihoods, which is valid, right? It's entirely valid. Um, the question is what to do about that. And if you start talking along the lines of, well, this technology is inherently evil, I want you to ask yourself, where does that logic go? What has that type of logic, um, where has it led in the past? Because I don't think Luddism is the answer. I don't think destroying the machines or moralizing about individual consumption is a viable path. I would like somebody to give me an example of a point in time in modern history where you were able to slow the advancement of technology just by finger wagging. It's never happened. I'm sorry. It's not going to work. Um, but I share, art to the artists out there. I share your frustration, you know. Um, Believe me, I would prefer for this not to be the case, that any inherent advancement in technology leads to the immiseration of workers. But that's the way capitalism functions. Um, any kind of reduction in socially necessary labor time makes the production process more efficient, and by definition, make renders the worker more and more obsolete in the production process. And this has been playing out over the course of hundreds of years at this point. And I think we are getting to a stage where things are going to start getting really weird. And I haven't fully articulated, like, I haven't fleshed out for myself what that entails entirely. I don't want to make any alarmist or outlandish claims, but things are going to start getting weird. And I think people need to mentally prepare for that. Um, and we need to refrain from defaulting to knee jerk defense mechanisms when we talk about technology. We need to understand that it's not the technology that is stealing from you. It's people. Like if we want to accept this framework of intellectual property and say that, well, I as an artist um, created something. I had an idea and I somehow translated that idea in a fixed, tangible medium. And therefore, this is my intellectual property, and I own I own it. I have an exclusive monopoly over how it should be used. First off, I want you to understand that this is a sort of legalistic argument, and um, defaulting to legalistic reasoning in this situation has rarely worked out for people who don't have power historically. Um, and so I guess what I'm insinuating here is that if you think regulation is going to fix this problem, I don't really think you're fully grappling with the extent of the problem. I hope that makes sense. I'm speaking off the cuff here. This is not scripted. I'm just trying to get something across here, which is that we need to think about how these things have played out in history. You cannot lead off with your moral presuppositions and pretend like that's power. It's not. Dramatic silence. Um, I guess moving on to some more to some other topics here. I am I'm gonna do another video on 3D Workers Island, and it's going to entail trying to clarify certain things that I think people are confused about, things that I did not present um, in a clear enough way. Like part of my function, part of my role, as I see it, is to be a communicator. And if there are enough people, um, if there are enough people who are confused about what I'm trying to say, then I've failed as a communicator. Um, there are aspects of this that I don't have control over. I can tell a lot of the times I can tell based on a comment whether someone has actually watched even 10 minutes of my video. You know what I mean? Like if they're reacting to the title and the length of the video, I can tell that they haven't watched it, because they're reacting to some superficial features of, you know, the product, I suppose. So, like I can't control how much time and attention people are able to dedicate towards my videos. I can't control that. What I can control is you know addressing misconceptions, trying to do it in a way that's not moralistic, non-judgmental, um, and just try to continue to facilitate open open dialogue and critical thinking. I'm seeing a lot of what I would call thought terminating cliches being employed um, in order to prevent critical thinking. I think this is a fundamentally conservative impulse, um, but people across the political spectrum exhibit it. There's another issue I have, which is somewhat frustrating. Which this work is called 3D Workers Island, and the central theme of it is something called worker degeneration. And obviously, there is some kind of tension here between the individual and the collective, and the Hegelian dialectic, uh, Hegelian dialectic of alienation, and the Marxist dialectic of alienation. So if you don't know what I'm talking about, you can watch my read through. Um, and I kind of spell this out in the final part of my read through, which I think is like 6 parts. So if you just go on to part 6, I spell out what I think about the tension between this like general Hegelian alienation The idea that when you create something or when you interact with somebody, when you act in the world, um, because you don't fully understand the nature of reality, we have very limited access to reality because we can only like really rely on sensory data, and that sensory data is interpreted by the brain, and the brain is not, you don't have 100% fidelity. You don't have perfect access to the real, right? And so whenever you create something, whether it's whether you're building a desk or making a movie or writing a poem or writing a text to somebody, once you put it out in the world, um, it's never really going to fully come across with 100% fidelity what your intentions were. There's always going to be some kind of tension between what you had in mind and what the end result was. Sometimes the sometimes the discrepancy between what you had in mind and the end result is interesting in and of itself, and kind of a happy accident. So I think that's part of the uh, that's a good part of the process, of creating something. Um, but it is alienating to some degree to see that your end result is not precisely what you had in your head, and even what you imagined in your head was kind of fuzzy in the first place. You begin to realize this once you create something. Um, I would venture to guess that most people know what I'm talking about. Um, and this Marxist dialectic. So that's what I just described is like a Hegelian concept of alienation, and then there's a more specific form of alienation uh, that pertains to the capitalist mode of production. So because we are because the working class is subordinated and put in a position where their labor is commodified, and they have to sell their labor in the marketplace, and enter into the wage system. Um, this creates all sorts of different types of alienation. Um, you're alienated from the product of your labor because you're not really in control of the production process. Um, you don't really have a say in how these resources are distributed. You're alienated when you go to the grocery store and there's a bunch of commodities for sale, and you are totally disconnected from how these commodities were produced, right? These are just a couple of examples of the types of alienation that occur in in the capitalist system. You'll note you'll note again that I'm not making any normative claim here. I'm simply describing things, right? I'm making descriptive statements. What you take away from that is up to you. Your moral presuppositions are up to you. I'm not going to tell you what you should do or what you should believe generally. I try to refrain from doing that. It's very presumptuous to to start going into that territory as a creator because I don't know you. It starts to lead to some parasocial shit. But anyway, there's this tension here between this Hegelian dialectic and a Marxian dialectic, and I talk at length about that in the video. I don't frame it specifically in those terms, but I try to attack each point. So like I'm getting this one sentiment I've heard in response to my videos is that uh, that because 3D Workers Island in some sense alludes to or entails abuse, that because I don't explicitly talk about that, in some sense, that's like disrespectful to the source material. And what I want to say to that is it's more complicated because 3D Workers Island is, you could view it through many different lenses, and to try to be the arbiter of what you are allowed to talk about in relation to a work of art is a moralistic endeavor. You're saying I should be talking about X topic, but instead I'm talking about Y and Z topics, right? Um, this moralistic engagement with art, I think, is a big problem because it kind of shuts down your critical thinking abilities to some degree. And it is a conversation stopper. And I want to continue the conversation. I want to try to generate more discourse and get your brain working, you know? So it's frustrating to see people default to these thought eliminating cliches. Um, but like more specifically, when it comes to this criticism, I guess what I would say is that I talked at length about abuse in my analysis of Petscop. And in some sense, 3D Workers Island is a meta commentary on how Petscop was received. So it's entirely fair to talk about abuse, but you have to understand that 3D Workers Island is kind of a different beast because there's an extra layer of discursivity. I've tried to I repeatedly tried to say that throughout the video. So one of my biggest concerns, and it doesn't seem to have bothered anyone actually, but one of my biggest concerns when I put out the video is that I was repeating myself too much. And the reason I did that was there's a couple reasons. The first is that I know that repetition helps people um, helps people learn, right? It helps people integrate that information. Um, And so I try to repeat a number of things throughout this 2 hour long video. But the second is that 3D Workers Island itself demonstrates or exhibits a sort of a fractalization between the screensaver and the discourse that emerges as a result of people observing this screensaver. It creates a sort of fractal pattern. Um, and so when you talk about fractals, what I'm trying to allude to here is recursion, a sense of recursion, infinite recursion, um, because things happen in the screensaver, people respond to those things, and it's insinuated that somehow people's responses are integrated into the screensaver itself because worker simulation uses resources in the world, right? This is explicitly stated. Um, and so this is what I mean when I talk about uh, fractalization or recursion. And so to try to impress upon you that general theme that emerges in the work, I repeat myself a number of times throughout the video. And I really was worried that people were not going to take too kindly to that because they would just think I'm being redundant or just I don't know, just kind of trying to pad out my script to make it long. That was not my intention. But yeah, these are the things you have to deal with. And um, this one thing I really tried to impress that I think I'm worried it's not really coming across is that my emphasis on a systematic, scrutinizing systems, trying to apprehend things at a systemic level. Um, the reason for that is that everything is a system. The human brain is a system. The economy is a system. The environment is a system. The family unit is a system, right? So this process whereby when stress is applied on a system, there are certain uh, so complex systems by their very nature seek homeostasis. They seek a some kind of balance, right? Um, if you're talking about the human body tries to maintain a certain temperature. It tries to uh, there's a certain sort of homeostasis that needs to be reached in all cases. Um, and failure to achieve this homeostasis results in death. Um, so I guess what I'm saying here is that everything is a system. And so, for instance, like you can draw parallels between any one of these systems and try to make analogies so that people understand. Oftentimes, when there's tension within the system, there is a tendency to try to blame something, some specific aspect of that system as being aberrant. And that's actually not the case. It is, in fact, most likely a result of the inherent contradictions by which that system operates. In other words, for example, eventually the body breaks down and you die. There are, there are some tech moguls who are trying to fight this. They don't want to die, but we haven't gotten there yet. The human body seeks homeostasis, but eventually it fails, and its uh, its contradictions give rise to the death of that individual, right? The same is true for environments. The same is true for the family unit, right? So, like, for example, when a family unit is undergoing stress, people in that family might try to blame others for the stress and say, you're the reason. You're the reason we're having all of this distress. When oftentimes that's not really the case. So what I'm thinking of specifically is the example of Amber in 3D Workers Island. P. Lawler tries to say that Amber's lazy and that uh, she's young and she should be doing something. And meanwhile, Pat's retired and kicking her feet up. Um, P. Lawler is trying to label Amber as the aberrant other in that situation, when in reality, Amber is subject to this process of degeneration as it is spelled out in the story, right? Um, and that is occurring at the systemic level, right? It's not because of anything Amber did that was wrong. It's a result of the inherent contradictions of the software that that generates this simulation. So there are parallels here. They're very interesting parallels between uh, tension that the family unit experiences versus tension that, for example, the economic system experiences, right? Like, so oftentimes what happens when there's economic problems is there is a tendency to blame an aberrant other for problems that are a result of the inherent contradictions of the system. So I don't think I need to tell you the ample, the litany of examples of that. Conservatives hysterically uh, complain about crime and social justice warriors trying to ruin society and immigrants, right? In reality, the the broader problems that most people face in terms of failing to meet their basic needs are not a result of immigrants, they're not a result of children on college campuses protesting injustices. You know, these things are the reactionary mind seeks to blame an aberrant other for things that are a result of systemic contradictions, right? This is reactionary behavior wherever you see it. If you're failing to recognize that there is a fundamental issue with our economic system that generates periodic crises, then you're asking the wrong questions. So I think I have, I think I've discussed this exhaustively, and we can kind of just put a pin in that and move on. I think I'll leave it there. If you have watched this whole video, thank you for listening. Thank you for hearing me out. I know I'm kind of rambly, and when I speak off the cuff, I am not the most effective communicator. But this is, this is just supposed to be kind of a vlog to give you insights into my thought process when I was making this behemoth analysis video. I hope it was worth it. Um, but yeah, I'll leave things there. Take care. Have a good one.